folks, welcome back to my channel. I'm Lou Yardley. I'm an indie horror slash fantasy author from the UK, and on Tuesday the 10th of November I released this little baby. This is Banished. I realised that I've pretty much done absolutely no promotion for this, so I thought, I'll record a Q&A video and put it on YouTube, which is a brilliant idea, apart from when I came up with the idea earlier this morning, I had no questions. So thankfully my monthly supporters have been on hand and they've given me a list of questions which I'm gonna read off my laptop in a minute. And also I'm gonna make up some questions for stuff I think that people might want to know about the book. But to start off with, I'm gonna read the synopsis so you get a rough idea of what I'm talking about. So this is Banished. Elkbury is an idyllic village hidden away in a rural area of pseudo-medieval fenari. It's a place free of death and disease due to a mysterious ceremony called the Banishment. It's a secret system that has worked well for decades, but secrets rarely stay secret forever. When Hedwyn's grandmother is about to undertake her own banishment, he and his best friend Laura Beth decide to find out what their beloved Anastasia is about to experience. Just like disease, murder has no place in Elkbury, but it's wormed its way in. Wren Goodwort takes it upon herself to find the mysterious killer and clear her name in the process. Soon Wren, Hedwyn, Laura Beth and the rest of the villagers are thrown together to fight for their lives as deadly, monstrous and hungry secrets are uncovered and Elkbury's delicate balance is destroyed. Banished will introduce you to your new favourite monsters. Some human, some not. And that's what the book is about. So yeah, it came out on the 10th, which was Tuesday. I'm recording this on Friday. Hopefully I'm going to get it up fairly soon. And I know that my patrons have already had their copies. They had got their copies 2 or 3 weeks before the book actually came out, so they've had plenty of time to read it and come up with some questions. I've got a few on my list, so I'm just going to dive in. I'm going to try and do these in an order where I don't end up answering the next one while I'm still answering the first one, if you know what I mean, because the questions they ask do kind of all link together. Neil Fraser, the guy who designed this beautiful cover, he asks, how do you cope with artistic block? Do you have a fail-safe way of powering through it, or do you just walk away for the day? He also asks another question, but we'll get to that in a minute. I have a really good way, this year I've really discovered a good way of getting rid of artistic block. What I do is, instead of sitting down to try and write 2,000 words at a time, which is generally my target that I try and do, what I do is I do short bursts of 500 words in a go. So in the morning I might get up and write 500 words before I start work. So I'll whiz through and I do those 500 words and then I'll stop, and if it's a work day I'll go do some work, or if it's a stay-at-home day I'll go and do something like the washing up or empty the cat's litter trays or something like that. So I find when I'm doing those other tasks that have nothing to do with my story, my brain is still thinking about the story. So I'm like, oh, I must wash this plate. Well, my brain is going, well, maybe they should do this, and maybe this person should do that, and oh, that's how they get out of that situation. So then when I come back shortly afterwards to write the next 500 words, it's already there. I know what I'm going to write. And then I stop again, and then I repeat the process until I've done my 2,000 for the day. I used to have a different process to that, where I just try and write loads of stuff in one big go, and it does work, it can work, and I think it works for lots of other people, but I find this way it's perfect, and I haven't experienced any kind of artistic block since I started doing this, so it's brilliant. Although that doesn't stop plot holes from forming, I still get those. The best thing to do with those is, like you say, walk away. I find getting outside really helps. So in the summer, when we were still kind of in half lockdown, I found walking around the park was really good, or going for a run's really good. Just anything to get away from the thing that you're doing. I hope that answers the question. So Neil and Daniel, another of my patrons, also asked a similar question, so I'm going to combine them. And Neil asked, and what triggered you to create fenari? Was there a specific book / show that got your brain ticking? And Daniel asks, same as Neil, what triggered fenari, or more, what triggered mixing fantasy and horror? Now, I don't think mixing fantasy and horror is necessarily a new thing. I think lots of people have done that in the past. But what done it for me is that I'm a big fantasy fan and I'm a big horror fan, so it just made sense to combine the two. Back at the... I'm trying to answer this because I can see what the next question is and I don't want to answer the next question before I've answered this question. I'm just going to have to go with it. So I'm going to take you back in time a little bit. Back in March, when we first had our first lockdown, I was just about to release Dark and Wings Flutter, and that came out on the 3rd of April, I think. So I wasn't writing anything at that point, but I was in the really enthusiastic get up and go part of the pandemic, you know, when everyone was baking banana bread and doing exercise. I didn't do those things. Well, I went for a run, that was it. But my, like, get up and woo kind of thing was to do online history courses, of all things. So what the beginning of lockdown did for me was reawaken a love I had for medieval and Tudor history, and also Roman history and various other things. So at the beginning of that lockdown, I spent a lot of time studying that kind of stuff. And I didn't really plan for it to go anywhere, but then like little cogs in my brain started turning. And I remembered this story idea that I'd had back when I was writing Hellhound, so that would have been like 2017, 2018. And it was the main premise for Banished. But up until that point, all of my stories had been written in like present day, now, this world. And I couldn't make it work, because how could you hide a ceremony like the banishment when there's the internet and mobile phones? It didn't make sense. So I started thinking about making Banished a like historical horror. That was where that was going. But around the same time, I also got into playing Dungeons and Dragons for the first time. I mean, I've been talking about wanting to play it for years, and then the opportunity came to actually join a game that was just starting, and I got into it in a big way. I'm still into it in a big way. So then I wasn't content with just having like this medieval story. I wanted magic and all kinds of weird and wonderful creatures. So that's where the fantasy element came in. And then Banished was pretty much born. Was there a specific book or show that got your brain ticking? And this also goes back to Daniel's question about mixing fantasy and horror as well. There are a few things that I drew a lot of influence from, other than Dungeons and Dragons and history courses. I also watched a lot of YouTube videos about medieval weaponry and stuff. I subscribed to a magazine called Medieval Warfare. That's really interesting. But other than that, there are some books and shows. I'm a big fantasy fan, as I've said. I love Joe Abercrombie stuff. I like that his characters are neither particularly good or particularly bad, and I think that's something that happens a lot in Banished. I mean, I've got some characters in there that I absolutely love, but they're arseholes. But sometimes they do the right thing, but they're arseholes. So I wanted to have a bit of that. Also I have to cite Ben Galley, another fantasy author, as an influence on this. The work he does on world building through each of his novels is amazing. So we're just about to be joined by a special guest. Hello! He's not going to say anything. I'd have a shock if he said something. Say hello to everybody. No. Anyway, so yes. Ben Galley, really good fantasy author. Go and check him out. The other things were in terms of horror, I've been reading a lot of Hunter Shea this year, and I just love how he writes monsters and how he writes people dealing with monsters, so I'm hoping that's kind of going to shine through a bit. And of course Sean Hudson, the king of gore. As for shows, actually I'll do film first. There is a film that I absolutely love called The Headhunter. And to me this just combines horror and fantasy perfectly. And it's like, I think it's like an indie film, it's got quite a low budget, there's this tiny cast and even less dialogue really, and the way I always describe it to people is like this, and it sounds really boring. So, oh yeah, there's hardly anyone in it and no one says anything for ages. But it's really, really good. They managed to build a whole like fantasy world with barely saying anything. And they also managed to create like this really cool horror thing as well. So go check that out. It's probably on Amazon Prime or Netflix or something like that by now. And the final thing that's influenced me in a big way is The Outpost. And I think it's on the CW in America, but it's on Sci-Fi here. But basically it's set on an outpost. And beyond their walls they've got these things called greyskins, and there's also plaguelings. So they're in like this kind of medieval kind of world with monsters. Sounds familiar. But it's different, I swear it's different. The next question is from the Koi Caterpillar Reads, and she has an awesome book review blog. Go and check that out. I'll try and remember to put the link down below so that you can go and check that out. She says, what kind of research did you do to prepare you for writing Banished? How long did you spend doing this before writing it? So I mentioned the history courses I did at the start of the first lockdown. That was kind of the beginning of my research, except that I didn't know I was doing research at that point. So I can't really say how long I did. I'm still dipping in and out of history courses and history documentaries and stuff. So I'm still doing research. I'm still building up ideas for this world of fenari. And yeah, so that's not really stopped. I will say one thing, I've done loads of different courses and watched loads of different videos. What I will recommend, if you want to know about like medieval weaponry, I can highly recommend Shadowversity. His channel is brilliant. But I think the course that influenced Banished and fenari the most was one that was quite specific, and that was a course on the medieval Icelandic sagas. How I ended up doing that course, I have no idea. Just went down this rabbit hole of history courses and I ended up doing that one. And it was really, really interesting. I think it's still available for free, so go check that out. If I remember to, I will put the link down below so that you can. And the big thing that came out of that one is not only like all the mythology and different monsters and stuff. The thing that really shone out for me was when they were talking about women in the Icelandic sagas. And at one point they said, oh, if you see that there's a woman called Grimma in a story, you know there's going to be magic. And at the time I was writing Banished by this point, and there was a character there who is a seer. And in this course they said, you know there's going to be magic, and usually these women have powers where they can see things that others can't. So I already had this seer character, and I just thought, that's it, that's her name, Grimma. She was called something else up until that point, but from then on she was called Grimma, and she's one of my favourites in the whole book. So as for how long I spent doing this before writing it, it was probably about a month or so before I really jumped into writing the novel fully, but I was still researching and studying as I went along. But yeah, there are parts of Banished that don't fit into any historical context whatsoever, and that's fine. Daniel also asked another question. What is the future plan for fenari releases? Then he's put in brackets, if you even want to talk about that. Of course I want to talk about that, Daniel. I really want to talk about that. So, Banished is out. It came out on the 10th of November. You can buy it from lots of lovely places. I will stick some links down below. Buy it from whichever place you want to buy it from. I don't mind. But if it was down to me, I would say buy it direct from me. Or go to your local indie bookshop and buy it from them. They need your help now more than ever. So, Banished is out. We're currently in November, so I'm taking part in NaNoWriMo. And my NaNoWriMo project is a novel called The Werewolf of Everfrost. I'm currently torn between calling it The Werewolf of Everfrost and just Everfrost. That's like a one-word title. Because then it follows on nicely from Banished, Everfrost. That works, right? Anyway, so I'm writing that. So the plan is to get the bulk of the first draft done this month and next month. And then early next year I'll start editing it and sending it out to beta readers and doing all that kind of stuff. So maybe looking at March or April again for the release date. Everfrost is a loose sequel to Banished. While Banished can be enjoyed as a standalone, I'm also tying it into the rest of the fenari novels. So Everfrost is a loose sequel, so the people who survive Banished, some of them end up in Everfrost. And it's set 16 years in the future. At the moment, I do reference the events that happen in Banished a bit, but I'm hoping that you can also enjoy Everfrost as a standalone. But if you've read Banished, you get a whole other exciting aspect. So that's that plan. I'm also working on a loose prequel to Banished, which again I'm hoping you can enjoy as a standalone or enjoy as a prequel. And that's called Creep. I've mentioned it, I think I've mentioned it maybe on my channel once or twice. I know I've mentioned it over on Patreon and Ko-fi. And Creep is like the origin story for one of the characters that appears in Banished. I won't say which at the moment. Although I think I may have said which somewhere else. But I won't say it now. And the idea is to get that out some point next year as well. The earlier the better. Then once all those are out and they've all been, well, once they've all been edited and made pretty, once all those are out, I'll start on the next trilogy, which will also be set in fenari. And I'm currently calling that the Jester trilogy at the moment. I might give it a snazzier title. But so far I've got the title for each book decided, I've got a loose plot for each book decided, and a loose like overall plot for the trilogy decided as well. Although my main character's name keeps changing, so better get that sorted. Okay, so I'm hoping that answers that question. Oh, as well as those, I'm also doing monthly stories for my supporters on Patreon and Ko-fi. Those are like little bits of flash fiction that gives you little insights into different parts of fenari and the different people that live there. That's going well. I've done 2 of those stories so far, and you can check out one of them down below. It's called Rat-a-tat-tat. So once a month I'll write a short story, record a video of me reading it, and then share it with my supporters, and then once a quarter they decide which one goes live for you all to see. So that's pretty cool. And in addition to that, I've also done some commission work for people, so I've put them in their own story set on fenari. At the moment I've closed commissions for that just because I'm so busy with NaNoWriMo, but I'm going to reopen them again in December. And if you want your own fenari story, just head on over to my Ko-fi page, links down below, and you can request a commission. How cool is that? Right, I think that's covered all of my future plans for fenari at the moment. For the immediate future. I'm also working on building the world on World Anvil as well, and that will be shared with my lovely supporters on Patreon and Ko-fi. Right, so that's all my Patreon questions done. I think those guys and girls asked pretty much everything that I was expecting. I was expecting like the what's your favourite character, So I'm going to answer that. So Lou, who's your favourite character in Banished? I'm glad you asked. I've got 3. The first one I've mentioned already today, and that is Grimmer. Oddly enough, she was only due to be in the story for a couple of chapters at the beginning, but I just enjoyed writing about her so much that she's in quite a bit more of it. I'm not going to say how much, because I just realised I nearly did a spoiler. But yeah, she quickly became one of my favourites, and every time I wrote a scene with her in, it just brought me so much joy. So I hope it brings you a lot of joy to read it as well. The other characters that I really love, one of them is a guy called Father Arcadius, and he's the head of the Church of Autumn, and it's him that is in charge of the banishment ceremonies. And I mentioned morally grey characters earlier, I think. He is a morally grey character. He does some very bad things, sometimes for good reason, but also sometimes for his own selfish reasons as well. But again, there's never a dull moment with Father Arcadius. And another one that really stood out to me was one called Angus Rutland. Now, as some of you may know, especially if you support me on Patreon or Coffee, a lot of the characters in this book were named by my supporters. And one of those characters was Angus Rutland. The character itself, I'd already started including him in various scenes, and up until that point he was just called the One Who Walks. But when the name Angus Rutland came up, I just thought, oh, that's him! That's the dude! That's Angus! And I like Angus because, again, quite morally grey. He does some good things, does quite a lot of bad things, does some hideous things. But I do love him. He's just very, very lovable and super fun to write. So I hope he's super fun to read. So I think I've rambled on long enough. I hope I've answered the questions I was asked. I do realise I just kind of kept talking, which is worrying. If you like what you've heard today, if any of it made any sense and you think, oh yes, I want to read this Banished book, then please do. There's links down below where you can buy it. I think that really is everything now. So all that's left for me to say is bye!